Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Budget Builds. Alright, so there's this new hotness going around. It's the Mua Thea Mage March. Right, the most common version leverages the Viges of Sanctus artifact. You know, the March can technically work with any Magic Legion, but it's far, far stronger with Celestials. And so with this new March, I've gotten a lot of questions about what type of pet to run with it, particularly for the free-to-play or low-spend players who can't afford a big, expensive pet. And so that's what we'll be looking at in this video, a budget pet for me and Moo. Alright, so because it's the budget build, we're going to probably focus on hero enhancement. So let's take a look at what this March is trying to do. The most important thing to understand about this March, it's a very tanky, high defense, high healing, outlast the enemy kind of March. It also does an excellent job supporting your other nearby legions. The weakness of this March is it doesn't have a lot of punch, right? This is one step above like a Garwood Eliana merit trading kind of March. Alright, so we're going to look at the heroes, and let's start with Thea, and let's take a look at her skills. Now, the Rage skill gives us a shield, and if we have Thea Awakened, it also gives a shield to a nearby friendly legion. The skill also gives us a bonus to hero skill damage for 15%, and it ends when the Rage skill is cast. Alright, her second skill, that's just some stat bonuses, nothing important there. The third skill is a lot more interesting. She gets 20% defense, okay, easy. But when it's composed entirely of flying units, we also get a 10% attack boost and a 20% march speed boost. The flying legion condition, it's only looking at what sort of units your legion has. The legion itself doesn't need to fly. So if you got Moo and Thea, obviously Moo doesn't fly. But if they're leading Celestials, you get the second half of this skill bonus. But if they're leading, for example, Vestals, you don't get this. This is one of the reasons you really want to use this March with Celestials only. Now, the fourth skill is very interesting. We get a 10% attack bonus every time the Legion gets a shield, stacking up to a maximum of 30%. Important things here. This bonus lasts the entirety of combat. So long as you're in combat, once you have this bonus up, you're going to have it the entire combat, right? Whenever you break combat, it goes away, and you have to reestablish it again. So you really want to get this up as quickly as possible to get that 30% attack as long as possible. Alright, then we have the Awakened skill. The main thing here is it gives the shield to another friendly legion once you have Thea Awakened. However, the second half of the skill where you get that bonus to skill damage, it only counts for Thea's legion. It doesn't extend to the other legion you give a shield to. Okay, let's take a look at Moo. Now, her Rage skill does some damage and does cleave damage, hitting a couple other legions. And it also puts a debuff on whoever's hit, decreasing the healing they get for a period of time. The skill damage is 1300. That's okay. It's not amazing. Decent, alright? Her second skill. Now, the second skill gives Moo some AoE healing and also some personal healing. The AoE healing's one shot. The personal healing ticks 3 times, once per second. Third skill, just some stat buffs. Nothing particularly interesting here. The fourth skill, this is very interesting. It gives Moo a stacking damage buff every time Moo heals, lasting 5 seconds, right? You can stack it up to 3 times, and it maxes out at 6%. So if you have this maxed out, you get an 18% damage boost. That's very strong. All right. Now, this can be healing on Moo's legion that triggers it. It can also be healing on other legions. And it's important to note, very important to note with this skill, it can be triggered multiple times per second. All right. You want to get this healing skill up as quickly as you can. Now, this damage boost only lasts 5 seconds, but there's no internal cooldown on this. You can get it rolling as long as you're doing healing. Alright, and then finally, Moo's Awakened skill gives some rage and some damage bonus stats. Nice, but nothing particularly interesting here. Okay, so now Moo's kind of interesting because she has both a legendary and an epic version. And since this is budget builds, let's go ahead and take a look at epic Moo and what are the key differences. Alright, the skills are generally pretty similar but weaker. You know, for example, the rage skill does less damage, but it only hits one target. Let's key in on 2 main differences here. First, her second skill, if she's epic, only heals herself. She gets no splash healing. Alright, so if you want to get that healing synergy on epic Moo, you're going to have to work a little harder. The other difference I want to key in here is her fourth skill. When she gets the healing buff, the epic version gets an attack buff. If you remember, the legendary version gets a damage buff. You'd much rather have the damage buff, so this is just not as powerful on the epic version. Her awakened skill is also different. It basically just makes her rage skill do more damage. Remember, on the legendary version, we got some stat buffs and we got some rage. Okay, so let's take a look at Mu's talent trees. There's some variations here on how you build it, but the main thing I want to focus on is a couple things on the right side of the tree. All right, first of all, force field. Anytime you get a buff, you get an HP increase. That's good, so we want some buffs. More importantly, pick me up. Anytime you either receive healing or a shield, you're going to get 15 rage. All right, so we want healing or shield specifically with this build. Now, an important thing to note with pick me up is this can only trigger once per turn. And then we have the end of talent trees. First of all, we got Flock of Blessings. Basically, whenever we get a buff, regardless of the buff, we're also going to gain healing, which means whenever we get a buff, we heal, which means we trigger Mu's field surgery and do more damage. All right, that's good. Only downside here, this will only be triggered once per 10 seconds, but this is a really good skill. Just more synergy for the Mu Thea March. The other alternative here is Punisher. Anytime we receive healing, we're going to do damage factor to the enemy, damage factor 150, so not amazing, but something. And once again, this can only be triggered once every 10 seconds. Now, the interesting thing here is if you remember Thea's rage skill, it's going to give you a 15% damage boost to your hero skill damage until the next time you cast your rage skill. So let's say you got Mu as the primary and Thea as the deputy. Mu casts her skill, it does damage. Thea casts her skill, it gets the shields, and then you've got, I don't know, 6-8 seconds or whatever before Mu casts her rage skill again. If Punisher goes off in those 6 or 8 seconds, it's going to get that damage bonus, but it's not going to clear that damage bonus because this is skill damage, but not rage skill damage. And so basically you get to double dip on Thea's skill. Now look, it's damage factor 150, that's not huge, but it's something here. It mitigates the weakness of this march. And that's why I've decided to go with Punisher here. But both Punisher and Flock of Blessings are perfectly legitimate choices here. It's really just a philosophical choice. Do I want to lean further into the synergy, or do I want to go away from the synergy to get more payoff and mitigate the biggest weakness on my march? Okay, so the last thing to look at before we look at the pets, what artifact does this march want to use? Well, in an ideal world, we're using the Visions of Sanctus, and this is another reason why we want to use Celestials. This is the best artifact for this march, and it not only grants shields either to your legion or another friendly legion, but it gains power whenever your legion gains shields and does damage whenever you cast a rage skill, right? And the important thing is here, you get the stack of Mark of Judgment, which is what it builds up. Whenever your legion grants a shield to any friendly legion, so it doesn't need to be this artifact, and it doesn't need to be your legion. So we want shields regardless of who we put them on, regardless of how we get them. All right, but the thing with Visage, it's not a free-to-play, low-spend artifact. Most players in this category are not going to have this. So what's a good free-to-play, low-spend alternative to the Visage? Well, really, any mage artifacts can be found here. As we mentioned before, this march, is defensive in nature and lacks punch. So a good offensive artifact can offset that. Maybe the Phoenix Eye here. But if you don't have that, or more likely, you got the Phoenix Eye already allocated to another march, Tear of Arbon's actually a surprisingly good choice for this march. All defensive, so that really leans into the synergistic nature of it. And, obviously the Tear grants healing, not only to your legion, but any of the friendly legions around it. So, first of all, that's on plan. And all that healing you do is going to trigger field surgery skill, which is very strong. Okay, now what's the downside here? Well, this is another defensive artifact, so now we're almost to the point where we can merit trade with the Mu Thea March, and we're not mitigating our weakness at all. But honestly, if you're a free-to-play or low-spend player, you don't have that many options, Tear is probably your best choice for this march. Okay, having said all that, let's just summarize what this march is doing and what it wants to do before we move on to the pets. All right, first, its strengths. It's extremely defensive, and it's got great healing and supportive in nature. What are its weaknesses? It lacks punch. All right, so and what do we really want? In order, we want healing, shields, and then other buffs generally. Okay, with that established, let's turn to our war pets. Now, I think there's a legitimate question about whether you generally want to emphasize the synergy with this march or mitigate its weaknesses, right? That's just a philosophical question you have. So if you want to go with the minimize weakness route, what would you do? Well, since the weakness on this march is a limited punch, you get a war pet that offsets that hits really hard, high DPS. And on this march, that'd either be the Sapphire Phaedrake, doing a lot of damage, straight up great DPS, or it would be the Seraphic, which also, if you build it out, would do some good damage and also give you a little synergy too. So, right, you could sort of double dip with a Seraphic. But this thing with either of those builds is to get like good DPS of either the Sapphire or the Seraphic, you have to go the full pet, the pet damage builds. Those are great builds, but they're not budget builds. That's not this video. This is budget builds. So what are you going to do if you're a free-to-play, low-spend player who can't really invest a lot for this pet? I think you got two very valid choices, and the first is the Seraphic. So let's remember what the Seraphic does. It's Soul Source, it does damage, and it also does a little healing. And then it builds up these things, stacks of entreaty, and basically every time you, via an innate skill, inflict a buff or a debuff, you get this stack of entreaty, and then the more stacks you get, the more healing you get, or the more damage you do. The reason we'd want this is we'd want to get the trigger for the healing to kick in all our synergies, so the sum healing we get, that's decent. Okay, let's think about how this is going to happen in terms of the rage cycle, right? So we have this in our Mu Thea March, so Mu's going to do her rage cycle, pause 1 second. Thea does her rage cycle, pause 1 second. The pet does its skill, and then if you have follow-up and if it triggers, then the follow-up triggers 1 second later. Now, if you watched a couple of my other videos, you might know that I kind of like, I don't think that highly of the Seraphic, and among the reasons I don't love it is the follow-up cast. It occurs so quickly after the first cast, it doesn't get these stacks of entreaty, and so the follow-up does less damage, less healing, etc. That's true, but on this march, it doesn't matter. We'd only want the follow-up cast to do that extra healing, right? Because we don't care about the amount of healing. We just want some healing, and so we can get essentially 2 triggers with follow-up. Now, remember, there's a downside here. Follow-up has a base 40% chance to cast. You can get that higher with advanced follow-up, but remember, advanced follow-up, that's the Amber skill. So do you want to spend Amber on this budget pet? I mean, it's up to you, but it's not something I would generally recommend. I think the Seraphic's an okay choice. It's going to do some damage. It's not going to do that much damage. It's going to give you some synergy. It's decent. The other option, and I think this is the right option, is the Sand Lizard. The Sand Lizard Stone Aura heals 4 legions, including your legion, every 6 seconds. All right, why is that important? First, this triggers as soon as you go into combat. And that healing, that will trigger Mu's skill. So you're going to get that proc right off the bat. And not only is it going to proc right off the bat, if you heal multiple legions with the Sand Lizard, which you usually will, you'll get multiple procs from Mu. Second thing is this is not part of the rage cycle. It just goes off every 6 seconds period. And so the Sand Lizard's heal is going to trigger more frequently than the Seraphic's heal. Okay, so we got the Sand Lizard. Other than the talent skill, what do we really want on this pet? Well, remember, first we want healing, then we want shields, then we want buffs generally. Okay, so to start out, the obvious choice is Great Care. This gives us a 10% chance to heal every second. Healing factor is not amazing, but we don't care. We just love the proc. The second obvious must include is Heart Wall. This is basically the same thing, but instead of healing, it gives us a shield. Remember, that will proc Thea's 4th skill, giving her an attack bonus. That will also proc the Visage of Sanctus if you have it. Great skill, obvious must include. Since we already have the Sand Lizard's talent skill doing healing on the pet, and we've already added Great Care, I think it is worth it to put the rest of the healing package in there. That's going to be Divine Blessing and Tranquility. Alright, what about the Sand Lizard's unique skills? Well, Advanced Stone Aura is going to give us additional healing. I mean, I'd love to get the healing off every 4 seconds instead of 6 seconds. That'd be great. But that's a 4 Amber skill. It requires very high agility. It's kind of tough to do. I don't think it's worth it. We're not going to include Advanced Stone Aura on this pet. The Sand Lizard's unique skill, Intense Stone Aura, that you get from the pet shop, this basically collapses the healing so you don't do the AoE healing. You only heal your legion, but you heal it much stronger. Under general terms, I'm not a huge fan of it, but on this pet, it's a terrible choice. We love the splash healing because that gives us additional procs of field surgery. If we only heal our legion, we only get 1 proc. That's terrible. That actually makes the pet worse to have it on there. Do not include Intense Stone Aura on this pet. Okay, what other skills? I think Outbursts of Rage is worthwhile inclusion. Now, I think Sudden Epiphany is a must include. It increases your legion's magic attack. That's, it's fine. We don't do a lot of punch. We might as well do more damage. Particularly if you're running this with Celestials, they have a higher base attack, so this is going to have a better effect. Right, Light's Guidance and Magic Pulse, those are your crit package. Moo does good skill damage. Thea does no skill damage at all. They have no base crit whatsoever, so these are actually fairly marginal. I think they're fine to put on, but honestly, I don't recommend them. Okay, what about other skills? Well, since we don't have a lot of really great things to put on here, and we are building to a very defensive pet, at this point, I think you lean full into the synergy and just make this march as defensive as possible. I want Robust Body on there. That increases your hit points. I want Terra Barrier on there. That's going to increase your defense. And I want Bristles on there. That's going to give you attack mitigation. Okay, so that leaves us with the Talent Skill, Great Care, Heart Wall, Outburst of Rage, Sudden Epiphany, Divine Blessing, Tranquility, and then fill it out with Robust Body, Terra Barrier, Bristles, whatever you desire. Now, like I said, there's another option for this pet, and while I do recommend the Sand Lizard, I think the Seraphic's a decent choice as well. So what are you going to put on there if we go with the Seraphic? Okay, obviously we got the Talent Skill. I think you got to put a follow-up on there. Now, follow-up is like mid-pricey. You can put a 0-star follow-up in there. It's going to do everything you want it to do, right? The only thing we care about is getting the second cast off to get that additional healing proc. The follow-up, the 0-star follow-up does less damage than a higher star follow-up, but it's not doing really any damage anyway. We don't care about that. We just want the follow-up with the proc. As I mentioned earlier, follow-up only has a 40% base chance. You can get that up with advanced follow-up, but that's an Amber Store skill. I don't think it's worth it here. I don't recommend it. Okay, after those two, what are we going to do? It's kind of similar. First of all, we want that extra healing. So the first thing we're going to buy is Great Care. After that, we want those shields. So the next thing we put on is Heart Wall. And after that, we want that Rage. So we're going to put Outbursts of Rage on it. And then we have the Robust Body, Terra Barrier, Bristles. Add those as you have skill slots left based on whatever attribute you have the highest. Okay, let's pretend we're running this march. We have no financial or Amber limitations. What kind of pet would we put on this? I think you put a Seraphic on here. I think you build it out for pet skill damage, and you trick it out, and it's going to look something like this. Now look, the pet skill damage build, that's going to perform better than this hero enhancement build. Here's the difference in price between those two builds. And that's it. Now I feature a number of Warpet themed series on this channel, and I'm always looking for more Warpets to feature. Now this could be a pet you're struggling with, and you like in-depth advice on how to build it out, or it could be a super strong pet, and you'd like to see it featured in the Doompet series. I try to help anyone who needs it with any Warpet related issues. So if you do send something in, please let me know whether you're interested in being featured in one of my videos, or if you're just looking for some quick advice. I'm happy to help either way. I also try to address more general, pet-related questions the community might have. If you have any of those, please let me know in the comments below. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And until next time, stay classy, Belleron.